As someone that runs a fintech blog, what are your thoughts on crypto and blockchain?
I think that blockchain technology is very interesting and has lots of applications in scenarios where you typically have intermediaries, you have a lack of trust. So it makes sense. This kind of transactions where actually no one trusts each other and you have lots of intermediaries. So that's one thing. Blockchain technology is very interesting. Cryptocurrencies, it can be sold as part of wider portfolio management, kind of something that will spice up your portfolio. But
Mhm.
as you say, it's very volatile. So for me, I just see it as a speculation. So I'm always very curious when people go all in cryptocurrencies as in something that fluctuates 50% within a month. I mean, it's great. But for me, there's a very big misunderstanding of what risk is. And then what I've seen again and again is that people don't understand something that can increase 100%, can decrease 100%, probably half the time, right? Is that if it takes a month, probably in 15 days, you have nothing.
The following is a conversation with Tristan Pelloux. Tristan is an entrepreneur who's passionate about fintech innovation and business strategy. He has significant experience working in strategy and financial services and has developed an understanding of trends in banking, fintech, payments, insurance, and everything in between. Tristan has also launched and run two businesses, StrategWhy, an independent consultant and advisory firm, and Fintech Review, an online media publication focusing on the fintech industry. Tristan approaches work with a genuine curiosity about what comes next. Here's our conversation. Tristan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
To start out, I have a quick question. For someone from your background and for everything that you've done in your career, do you think that you were born an entrepreneur or became an entrepreneur?
I think I became an entrepreneur. It was definitely not my calling uh, out of out of business school. I think I always thought I would work in finance in a big
Mhm.
bank all my life, and that was what I wanted to do. But then came to realize actually it was quite cool to be an entrepreneur.
If you told yourself when you were at like 15, 16 years old that you were going to go on and do your own thing, do you think you would have believed yourself or you would have said, no, I'm going to work for a company my whole life?
Yeah, I don't think I would have believed myself at that point. I was very determined in working for a company. So I don't think I would have believed myself. But even to be honest, even if you talk to me when I'm 25, you tell me, "Hey, you're gonna start your business," I don't think I would have believed you.
Got it. It's always interesting to see from a lot of the guests that I've had, kind of a lot of them have their own businesses, a lot of them are entrepreneurs. So I always like to ask if they were born one or they became one. And what's interesting is I always get a wide range of answers. Some people are like, no, you were born an entrepreneur, you were destined to do this. And some people are like, yeah, I thought I was going to do corporate and then I got interested in entrepreneurship. So always interesting to see the flow that people take in their lives. But cool that you got a chance to experience the corporate life and then became an entrepreneur. And we'll get into some of the entrepreneurial stuff, but quick question on your corporate career. During your time working for, I almost said corporate America, but I think you actually, it was corporate Europe. So we'll leave it at that. But during your time working in corporate, what was your craziest client story?
Um, I think that I mean, what's kind of crazy but not so crazy is that when you work in a big corporation, there's a lot of politics involved,
For sure.
which is which is what eventually would drive you crazy when you work. For instance, I don't know, you work for many months on a project and then it's killed because of some rivalries within an organization and the factions, and it's kind of weird. It's a mini country within a country in the end,
Mhm.
a large corporation. Um, so yeah, I mean, I have lots of stories of working my ass off on something that is being killed a few days later because of some weird reason. Um, that ultimately kills your appetite or your soul or whatever you have in you.
Mhm.
And that's, you asked me what pushes you, well, how I became an entrepreneur. I guess it pushed me in deciding that I would work for myself. If it goes well, it goes well. If it goes bad, it goes bad. It's all on me. No one is deciding kill something or destroy something for no reason. So that's, I guess, control over the outcome was the ultimate decision.
Do you think it's also when you make the pivot to become an entrepreneur, do you also have in the back of your head, God forbid if things fail, you're like, okay, at least, I took the chance. I have peace of mind that I try to do something kind of extraordinary on my own.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you're like, I think it's a bit betting on yourself. Is that actually, am I just whining and am I just bad? Or and then you try and maybe it is the case and you're like, okay, well, fine, actually, no, I can't survive on my own. So I guess it's a bit of a testing yourself. Am I just whining and actually I'm not capable, or
Mhm.
actually can I make it? I think it was a bit of this. Then you well, I guess you quickly realize if it's the case or not,
Yeah, for
because
sure. But
the grass is always greener on the other side. So
mhm.
when you're corporate, you're like, oh yeah, the entrepreneurs, they live a good life. Then you jump and you're like, okay, well, actually not. And then the other way around, I guess.
Yep, I think you're always looking at the other path, and I think it always looks greener because it's just something new and fresh. And a lot of the times, as you may know, being an entrepreneur, you definitely have days where your head is twisted like three times over. So interesting note on that. But kind of to get into some of the entrepreneurial stuff that you're up to. So you're involved in a few roles, you run a few companies, one of which is Fintech Review, kind of really interesting newsletter, and a lot of some of the things that I've read and want to ask about. But just high level, where does your passion for fintech come from?
So, well, during my corporate life, so I was working in corporate strategy and latterly focused on innovation projects and strategic partnerships with fintech companies and establishing joint ventures, this kind of stuff. So I got super interested in innovation in financial services, impact of new technologies on the business model of the bank I was working at. And so it came out of this, and I decided, well, how do I channel my kind of passion for fintech? And I said, well, okay, I could start a blog, and so that's how Fintech Review was born 4 years ago. And it evolved in being more than just me rambling about what's going on. So there's a newsletter. I do lots of interviews. I collaborate with companies on telling their stories, and also collaborating with conferences. And now I've also started doing online courses as a kind of side thing that I became also a professor of fintech last year at the university. So kind of I try to channel my fintech energy through Fintech Review, but it's just generally being curious about innovative business models and innovation, and I guess it's my passion for strategy, and
Mhm.
then became my passion for innovation in financial services.
I like that you brought up passion. When you started FinTech Review, do you think that it was something that you kind of strategically planned for? You looked at other FinTech newsletters or other newsletters and you were like, this is how it'll be different? Or you kind of just started it and it really just became what it became on its own?
Initially, I didn't think about it as a business, so I was like, okay, well, I just want to write about my ideas.
Mhm.
And then over time, obviously, it evolved, and then I started looking around and seeing how it could be different and how it would be different. Um, and then I decided that, well, okay, it was going to be opinionated, and then with a very strong kind of views on some topics. And I kept it that way. But it's a tough environment. One big publication just folded this week after 10 years, Altfi, because it's a tough environment. You have,
Mhm.
well, at first it's a niche. You see, when you're within your niche, you don't realize that it's a niche. It's a niche, and then the economics of online publications are a bit tough.
Mhm.
But yeah, initially it was a passion, so I didn't think about it as a business, and then it evolved being a business, which is a weird way to start something. But the other ventures that I have, I didn't start them as passions.
You know, what's interesting, I love how you said it was a weird way because I think a lot of entrepreneurs or a lot of people who say they became entrepreneurs and weren't born them kind of had some kind of corporate job or some standard job. And then they started working on stuff on the side that they really, really enjoyed. And as fate would have it, that really became one of their big ventures. So definitely a story we've heard before, but I think a beautiful arc into entrepreneurship, definitely. But speaking about fintech, you know, I've read some of your articles and they're really interesting. Is there any fintech company right now that you're really bullish on?
There is one out of London called Wise that I quite like because it started as a FX business
Hmm.
doing kind of your traditional, you want to convert your US dollars in pounds and facilitating, or you want to send money abroad. So they started like this, and then they evolved into providing more services to individuals and businesses. And they've had a very disciplined approach to growth, still growing massively, but also in a very calm and like I think the right way. And now it's a very decent business, so I quite like them. I tend to like businesses that are a bit more careful in how they grow, which is very trendy now, but it wasn't a very trendy approach 2 years
Hmm.
ago when it was like, yeah, no, you just raise money and you just grow and that's fine. And
That's like
now,
2 years ago you're talking about.
what?
That's like 2 years ago we had that kind of environment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I was already saying like this, so now I'm being proven right. But so I tend to like businesses like this that are
Got it.
that are not doing growth at all costs.
Got it. So, for example, in that kind of business, one that has FX as one of its kind of businesses or revenue streams, how would they make money? Do they charge some sort of commission? You know, because I imagine right now with a lot of these fintech startups and the democratization of the democratization of technology, you know, a lot of times people could probably make these transactions with very little or no commission. So, how would a company that facilitates those FX transactions make money?
Yeah, they take a commission. So basically, they give you the spot, and then they take a commission on the transaction. And any payment business, any FX or no FX, needs to be volume. So they have the volume. So
Hmm.
it means that they can take a very little
Finding.
commission and they make the volume. Some businesses now they say, hey, it's commission free because they try to attract the volume and make money. Maybe sometimes it's on the difference between the rate that they offer you and the spot. Um, but when you're in a position like this, when you have the volume and you can offer like very little commission, and also when you have additional services. So a business like this, because they provide you an account and
Hmm.
you can have lots of different, baskets of currencies, then you stay with them for that, not just for the transfer. Um, so it's, like trying to attract the customer for one thing and then providing other services. It's a game. But usually like services where you don't pay anything
Hmm.
and it's a spot as well. They try to make money elsewhere, or they just try to lose money a bit and then eventually they will charge you.
What's interesting about that too is because, you know, as a lot of these new companies pop up, or say, for example, you know, one company comes up with quote unquote commission free trading or commission free kind of FX or spot rates, you know, everyone else has to adjust. And it'll be interesting to see how low these margins can go because it all depends on volume. And I think it's great for the consumer, but it'll be really interesting to see the kind of competitive advantages these companies try to make going ahead. But
Mm.
interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Regarding something else in fintech that's also been a really hot topic and really volatile recently has been kind of crypto and decentralization. So, as someone that runs, you know, a fintech blog, what are your thoughts on crypto and blockchain?
Um, I think that blockchain technology is very interesting and has lots of applications in scenarios where um, you typically have intermediaries, you have a lack of trust, so it makes sense. Thinking trade finance, invoice finance, of this kind of transactions where actually no one trusts each other and you have lots of intermediaries. So that's one thing. Blockchain technology is very interesting.
Hmm.
Cryptocurrencies, I mean, it can be sold as part of wider portfolio management, kind of something that will spice up your portfolio. But
Hmm.
as you say, it's very volatile. So for me, I just see it as a speculation. Um, so I'm always very curious when people go all in cryptocurrencies, as in something that fluctuates, 50% within a month. I mean, it's great, but for me, there's a very big misunderstanding of what risk is, and then I think what I've seen again and again is that people don't understand something that can increase 100%, can decrease 100%, probably half the time, right? Is that if
Hmm.
it takes a month, probably in 15 days, you have nothing. Uh, and there's always a willingness to grow your money, not the
Hmm.
willingness to, lose it. Uh, and as long as you understand that and you're fine with it, then go for it. But if you only think it can go one way, this is trouble. Um, and as long as you know the rules and you know what you're doing with your money, then fine. For me, for instance, I'm a bit more old school when it comes to growing money. I don't mind if it's growing slow, as long as it's growing, because I don't like to lose money.
Hmm.
So I'm not ready. I'm not ready tomorrow to see my portfolio down 20%. That's not how I roll.
Yep, I don't think anyone's ready. And on a personal note, I definitely agree with you in that matter. I think I'm a little more old school as well in the sense that I try to make investments more based off value and things that are a little more tangible. I think crypto and finance, and by the way, I have to clarify, me nor Tristan, at least as long as I know, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. We're not financial advisors, so definitely just take this as entertainment. But I also think it's very speculative and maybe something worth it to have some sort of minimal exposure to. If you're okay with losing 5 to 6% of your portfolio in the case of the reward there potentially being a crazy multiple, but to go all in, definitely not something I would advise. But if someone's willing to carry the risks and is really intentional about that understanding, then that's all for them. But really interesting to hear your note on there, and I definitely agree with your thoughts on there. But another topic that's really been popping off recently, or maybe not as much, but at least was really big in 21 and 22, was NFTs. So I have to ask, do you own any NFTs?
No, 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 because I never really really understood. I mean, I understand what it does, but I never understood the whole hype around it. So I don't own any NFTs.
So I don't own any either. And I think what's really interesting about that, I think similar to cryptocurrency, but I think crypto, I'm not an expert in a lot of this crypto and blockchain, a lot of this stuff, but I guess people can somewhat make a connection between how crypto is within practical use. But I think NFTs, what's incredible for someone who's looking out from the outside or someone that's, not very for it or someone that's not actively participating, I'll put it that way. You see basically a piece of art that you can easily screenshot, or if you really enjoy, you can easily kind of use it your own. Maybe some people argue they have some kind of properties. I don't know. I'm no expert on NFTs. I'm just a podcast host. But what's really incredible is that you see something like NFTs, and then you see a lot of people or a lot of celebrities or people with an extraordinary excess of resources allocate a lot of money to these, basically paying 200,000, in some cases millions of dollars for essentially a screenshot or something digital, kind of with no producing value. And then what happens is, well, you see this in the markets, a lot of people get emotional about it. A lot of people are like, oh, if this person is investing in it or if this celebrity does it, maybe I should do it. And then that kind of artificially drives these asset prices up. And what's incredible about it is if you're really objective and you're not really emotional about it, you're thinking, okay, someone purchased it who's worth 20, $30 million, like whatever, $100,000 is nothing for them. But that person's not a financial advisor. They're not an expert. They're just, a celebrity. And then when stuff comes crashing down, you're like, look, we don't want to say we told you so, but we kind of had this idea. So I definitely think, I mean, I guess a cool concept, but if I ever really wanted something like that, I think I would just kind of take a screenshot and then kind of move on from there. But feel like I had to ask you about that since that seems like a dying trend.
No, I think like the point you're making around celebrities endorsing stuff, I think it's a big one because they do it for the quick bucks and then not realizing that what they're endorsing is complete shit. Same, like it's not NFTs, but I think it was Shaquille O'Neal that endorsed FTX, and then FTX is a fraud, and then he's like, oh well, not my problem. I was just pushing the platform, but it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, but you were paid to do this, and then you were pushing a scam, so how could you say that you're not responsible? And then this is where you reach the limits of the influencer economy, where you push for stuff, and then you realize, yeah, but you're pushing for scams. So it's I mean, it's interesting how this will all unfold in the US, because for instance, in France, they've introduced a law around like to try to regulate all this influencer economy, where you get paid to push for a product, then you can't then assume that I have no responsibility in you buying this thing. Yeah, but you're telling me to buy it and you're getting paid for it. So
Mhm.
how could you say that you have no responsibility? So I think it's quite interesting, and we'll see how this whole, like, there are a bunch of lawsuits that are in play, but how it will affect the influencer economy.
For sure. I think what's also interesting is I don't know the exact regulation as you mentioned in France, but if there was some kind of regulation of in the US, if some athlete or some influencer or someone high profile endorses such a thing, hypothetically like FTX, and then it ends up going to shit, maybe that person should be liable, for pushing that thing if an argument can be made that they either one knew it was a scam or two didn't have the basic understanding. Now, obviously, all this stuff is much more difficult to prove because a lot of it may just be negligence or kind of them going for the money. And I'm no legal expert, but if there was some kind of work in place there, I definitely think it would be less consumer shenanigans. We'll put it that way. So it will be
Mm.
interesting to see the direction where that goes in the future for sure. Speaking on another note, I know one of the things that you're really passionate about is business strategy. So on a broad level, do you think strategy is more art or science?
Uh, I think it's different. I wouldn't say science. I would say process.
Hmm.
Um, it's not really an art, actually. So for me, there are two elements. Well, first there is the ideation, the development. Everybody can have an idea. Fantastic! I want to start a restaurant. I want to build a social media platform. Awesome. That's free. That's cheap. Um, the execution is where the science comes in and the
Hmm.
process comes in. How do you take an idea and you turn it into a business? This is process, and there's no art in there. So I think probably an art in figuring out a business idea, even though you can try to. I think this part a lot of people are have try to process it. But it's because you can look at the market, you can look at various ways, like okay, how do I come up with a business idea? But then a lot of the time it's just a spark, and then but then the execution, this is where it's always a process. There is no art. Is that if you don't manage your legal side of things or your accounting, your business is going to turn into rubbles. So
Hmm.
this is where the execution, the strategy execution is a process. And this is where most businesses fail. It's not on the idea. You can have uh, like an average idea executed well. It's a good business. A really great idea executed badly, it's nothing.
Hmm.
So it's a business that will not survive. So this is where I focus more on the execution, because this is where I feel most of the companies fail and most of the entrepreneurs fail.
Yep, for sure. Definitely, I think process is important, and an idea is one thing, but if you can't implement it or kind of create something that's sustainable, then probably not something that's going to succeed in the future. So, really cool to hear your thoughts on that. But speaking about businesses, you actually run multiple businesses, and a lot of people have trouble just running one. So, how are you able to run multiple at once?
Well, you need to be organized. I think it's also something that a lot of people are not very good at, but you need to be organized. as in, have to-do list, have plans, have divide your time, divide your priorities across several ventures. So so I don't divide like saying, on Monday I work on this, on Tuesday I work on that. It's more, sometimes there are more priorities on one side, so I will focus on this, and then I will focus on something else after. And so I know across my different environments what I need to do and when, based on the priorities. So trying to organize yourself very well. But a lot of people do it. Not a lot of people, but some people do it. Well, first is to automate as much as possible what you can automate, delegate, and rely on other people. And yeah, this is how Elon Musk can run several businesses, because he doesn't run everything at all the businesses. He delegates what he wants to delegate, and then he focuses on what he wants to focus, and then he will divide his time, and he's kind of organized, I guess. But I know some other people that do the same. And it's just knowing where to put your attention and on what, and also the things where you believe it's not going to add value, you just delegate, you automate as much as possible. And this is, I guess, the secret.
Secret sauce for sure. Do you think most of this stuff is planning, or most of this stuff is kind of figuring it out in the moment?
A lot of it is planning. Whatever you can plan, you plan. And then what you you can't plan for, then being quick, taking a decision, being quick at executing something. Sometimes it's hard because, for instance, I love details, and then I had to learn sometimes to let it go on some stuff. Not spending too much time on a presentation, not spending too much time on reading 5 times an email. Just send it. So you need to learn as well, to execute faster, not to spend too much time on some tasks, repeating yourself like, yeah, it's fine. But a lot of it is planning, yeah.
Yep, for sure. And I think a lot of that figuring it out comes with time and just, an intangible feeling that I think is only sharpened with kind of the reps that you undertake. But speaking of that, I actually saw a post on LinkedIn that you had with a funny cartoon about being ready to adapt kind of at a moment's notice. And that's a big key to being an entrepreneur. Do you have any fun client stories or kind of running your own business stories where you had some kind of plan and then because of a change you had to adapt right away?
Yeah, I think it happens all the time, is that you make, that's why I said you plan for the best, you plan for different scenarios, then you need to adapt. So, like, oh, well, I have like a few client stories where you're planning for something for a fundraise to come in, and then the fundraise doesn't come, and then you need to adapt, restructure, review your plans. I think it happens all the time. You would make your plan expecting for the best, but then you need to be ready for the worst. And it happens a lot in business life. And also, you were saying, is strategy a science or an art? You plan the science, and then when something comes up, you need to be ready to, as you say, to adapt. But then the thing is, you should have planned for different scenarios. That's why, when you do a financial modeling for financial plan, you don't just have one scenario. Hey, everything is going to go fine. You say, well, what happens if the revenues don't come in? And I think it happens a lot of time. I never worked with a company, with a client, where everything goes according to plan. As this never happens. Sometimes very badly, sometimes a bit better, but it never goes according to plan. And it's very rare when it's like, oh, well, actually, we've grown much more than we were expecting. Cash is just flowing in. I don't know what's happening. Usually it's not the case. It's more, oh, well, we've lost, the product doesn't work. What's happening? I don't know, the system has collapsed. The migration is taking longer than expected. what should we do? Fundraising is not going to happen, or we can raise only half. What do we do? And then you just find solutions. I think an old boss of mine told me once when I was working in strategy, there are no problems, there are only solutions. Which is true. There is always a solution. There isn't
Mhm.
a problem that you can't solve. Sometimes solving it is hard and it's tough, but there's always a solution.
I think what I like that you said there too is that a lot of times, whenever you have a plan with a client or kind of an engagement, something always changes. It always goes according to plan. And I think a lot of times people go into these engagements, reading the request for proposal or kind of the contract, and they go in thinking, okay, this is exactly how the engagement's going to go. But then I think someone who's more seasoned knows, okay, this is what's on paper, but what's actually going to happen is maybe a little bit different. And I think the fact is when you're mentally prepared for that, that allows you to pivot much faster. So I think definitely something that comes with experience, but really interesting note that you brought up there. Back to some of the stuff regarding fintech review and kind of some of the companies that you run. A big thing right now in fintech or just in society in general is AI. I mean, you hear it probably in every investor presentation, every pitch deck. It's on the headline of every single kind of major article these days. I want to ask you a bit of a peculiar question. Do you think we should be scared of AI?
Um, at this stage, no. I think depending on what your job is, you should be scared. Um, I think, well, I mean, it's been years that we've said, yeah, AI is going to change everything, and to a certain extent, it's true. But most companies they can't really use AI because their data is all over the place. So, like AI is first and foremost you use data to like build your models and then do something with it. And then most companies actually can't. So I remember when I was working in banking, and you have like some great pitches from McKinsey around like how we should use AI, and then you realize, yeah. Then you turn to tech and you say, "Hey, can we use AI?" And they say, "No, like our data is all over the place."
Mhm.
Um, I think now what we see with Gen AI is that a lot of jobs can be automated or at least simplified. You don't need people. Well, everything that has to do with writing or like marketing and copywriting, translation. So some stuff are gonna be automated very, very hard. Um, but then also what you realize is for instance, when you're a strategy consultant, you come in and a company tells you, "Hey, can you help me with my business planning?" Sure, but they can find a business plan. It's not, they can ask
Mhm.
ChatGPT, but 10 years ago, they could already find a business plan on Google. What matters is a context, and then being as external validation of someone doing it for you and then helping you and kind of guiding you through the process. So whereas it simplifies if it's a Google 2.0, yeah, sure, somehow, but there's still people that will want the context of the information.
Mhm.
So I'm not so scared of AI for now. I think it's very helpful because it's in terms of productivity, especially with Gen AI, it's really good. And for other applications, chatbots super helpful so that you don't call or whatever. But then, is it gonna be for me? For me, technology is always the same. It creates new jobs, destroys some, creates new ones.
Mhm.
But if you look back, 30 years ago, maybe a bit more than that, accountants, finance people, they were not using Excel. They were using pen and paper, and they used Excel, kind of augmented the things that they can do. But the job of accountant hasn't disappeared, and it will not disappear. So you kind of jobs change, some new jobs appear. 20 years ago, you didn't have a social media manager. Now you kind of have one.
Have to.
So maybe we'll have more people working in AI, in robots. I don't know, like, but new jobs will come up. I'm not particularly afraid. You still need people to do whatever you want to do. So
Yep, for sure. But do you think AI will ever be able to kind of have a mind of its own or think on its own, or is that some sci-fi fantasy?
I think it can be super smart. For now, it's quite narrow. We're still nowhere near a general AI. I think it's the direction of travel. So, why not? Obviously, can it become self-aware, Skynet style, and then decide, hey, these guys are useless. We should get rid of them. Uh, could be. But I think we should. I mean, I don't see why we should limit ourselves, and especially even narrow AI. We should have like AI super good at, I don't know, like healthcare or medicine. We should have super good AI for some stuff that we're still limited, or you need people that have been 30, 40 years in a job. So why not? I don't see the problem with that. I'm never, as I said, I'm not really afraid of
Hmm.
technology. I don't see doomsday happening. I think people have always been afraid of technology changes. Ah, yeah, what is this car? I prefer riding horses. Oh, yeah, why do we have light bulbs? We're better with candles.
Hmm.
I think it's fine. Like if you look back articles, newspaper articles from 100 years ago, it was already the same thing.
Got it. It'll be interesting to see what those articles say 100 years from now, and I don't think we have to worry about that sci-fi fantasy horror, at least in our lifetime. But 500 years from now, I wonder if kind of the AIs will be writing those articles. I think maybe that's a question I'll have for Elon Musk one day when I have him on the podcast. So we'll leave it at there. But speaking about FinTech review, kind of on another note, kind of on the other end of AI, talking about banking, which is probably really a people-oriented industry, at least a lot more than people may admit. You have an article that I read that I thought was really interesting, titled "Are Banks Good at Lending?" I want to ask you, if a bank came to you, for example, and told you, "Hey, Tristan, we read your article about lending. We want to improve." What would you tell them, or how would you advise them?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I would look at, I would approach it in a very similar way as I approach any company that wants my help. Is well, looking at the state of play. What are the biggest problems that you have? I think when it comes to lending, usually it's I cannot get cheap funding for my loans, or I can't quite grasp how to calculate risks, and then look at, okay, well, these are the problems. How do you fix them? um, and what are the things that you do first, and what are the things that you keep for later. That's where things like prioritization frameworks come into play, and like what is the biggest problem, the one that will deliver most value, and what is the things that actually are tough to crack, and you try to put a matrix and efforts and value. So this is what I would do first, is that trying to understand what are the big problems and what are the potential solutions. And then going into project management and saying, hey, look, we're going to do this first. This is how we're going to break down the problem. And this is what is required from you. But usually first, I think it's important to first talk about, okay, what is your vision for this business or this business line or this product? What is your vision like? And then from the vision, you kind of build the strategies at the like not short term, but 1 year, 3 years. What is your strategy? And then from there, you kind of work out how you're going to execute. But as in, what I was saying, every problem, you try to break it down into manageable pieces. So if it's a very big problem, you try to break it down into like smaller pieces. Um, Typically, a big bank would have big problems. And so a big problem, hey, we're not good at lending overall. Okay, cool. Let's break it down. You're doing lending to individuals, businesses, mortgages, whatever. Okay, where are the bigger problems? And
Hmm.
then, okay, this is business lending. Okay, fine. And then within that, let's break it down. Is a problem in credit risk? Is it in actually the funding for the loans? And you try to, as I said, break it down and tackle what you think is more important first.
Got it. So really figure out where maybe those credit losses or those loan losses are coming from, and try to dive deep on that and figure out the issue regarding that specific area.
Yeah, I guess I'm very practical. I wouldn't come and say, hey, your solution, you should apply AI to all this, and then uh, problem solved. No, well, maybe the problem is operations. Maybe
Mhm.
it's no, the problem is not there. It's you should leave this market because you're just making a loss and you will never make money because it's a doomed market. So
Mhm.
looking a bit at the details of the problems that they might have.
Yep.
But as I said, all the businesses, it's always the same. This is where business strategy is actually a process and a
Mhm.
science. It's not. I mean, you can have a lot of experience in one industry, but then you go in a business that makes peanuts, you will approach the same way. Oh, well, why are you not good at selling peanuts? Well, let's look at where the problems are. But yeah, it's always the same.
A lot of it is also just pushing until you find out where it hurts. And I think a lot of businesses just aren't willing to do that. And then as someone coming in on the outside, you're more willing to kind of be a little honest. But what you said earlier, just kind of go in and implement AI, I think that's what every corporate consultant would say. But when an entrepreneurial consultant comes in, I think they're a little more real. So I'll just leave it at that. But another thing that I wanted to ask, as someone that's involved a lot of fintech and, speaking to industry leaders and writing articles and making interviews, I think that there's a big sentiment that, especially in recent years, or not even fintech, but just technology companies in general have been really overvalued. Do you think that right now, kind of tech companies are really overvalued, or do you think they're valued at where they're supposed to be at?
Yeah, I think most of them are really overvalued, and you can see it in. I mean, it's the same in the US or in Europe. Is that there are no IPOs, and there
Mhm.
are no IPOs because no one wants to take their losses. But because the thing is, they've been valued at crazy valuations through their later rounds. So now they can't provide the liquidity that investors want because investors were a bit too greedy. Um, and yeah, and now they're all way too valued, especially fintech, because a lot of businesses I saw around, and I was like, why? Like, how could you raise at 200 times your revenues in a tiny market, especially when you see fintechs are in very small niches, and you don't have to be a genius. You look at the market, you're like, yeah, but there's not so much money. So all the neobanks, and I'm like, yeah, sure. How much money are you going to make from an individual user? Actually, and you make money from people if you give them loans, so personal loans or mortgages, and mortgages actually is the best. But if
Mhm.
you don't do any of these on fees, you're not making that much money, or you get a lot of volume. Um, and I think a lot of fintechs are, well, they're a bit trapped now. So they need to cut their valuation up to the point where they can maybe IPO and give some liquidity. But when you see the pipe, you see like lots of unicorns, and actually they're not going to IPO because they can't.
Mhm.
And I think it's a lot of cases in SaaS businesses, lots of e-commerce focused businesses as well, where the valuations were too high. So now we're in a situation where valuations are a bit more tamed, and
Mhm.
it's good for everybody. Um, because the thing is, you're always trapped. Like getting a high valuation, it's not great if it's not meant to be your business because you're not going to be able to grow to meet that valuation.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's better. Well, first, it's better if you don't have to fundraise, don't fundraise because then you can control your growth, you can control the path. As soon as you get outside money and with a valuation that has expectations and a plan, then you're in a rush to get there, and
Mhm.
sometimes you can't get there. But investors, they don't want to take a loss, so you're like, okay, well, what do we do now? But I see it a lot in fintech, and still we're not yet to the correction. We have some corrections here and there, but we haven't seen a wave of businesses going bust yet. But it will probably happen.
the day of reckoning is probably in the future, but I think a good way or a good term maybe that the industry or investors can start using for failed unicorns could be unicorn costumes, because I think a lot of time they're just pretending like they're great, and then if you take the emotions aside, use some common sense, you see that really these companies shouldn't be valued anywhere kind of where they're valued at. And a lot of the times you wonder kind of how these investors were able to get such crazy kind of LP allocations to be used for these tech companies. I guess, for every 20 busts, there's one that's really incredible. So I think everyone's hoping that they get that 1 in 20, but I think it's a little more emotional investing than practical investing. So I'll leave that to the quote unquote experts. But Tristan, it's been an absolute blast. And as the last fun question I wanted to ask you here, I know you've lived in a few areas across Europe and just on the eastern side of the hemisphere. What's been your favorite country in Europe?
So I'm gonna be biased because I'm gonna say that my favorite country is where I am now. I, as you say, I've lived in. I'm French, so I've lived in France, in the Netherlands, in the UK, and now Spain. And I do like Spain. I like that the weather is great, the food is great, the cost of living is very good, especially even in big cities. And I live just outside of Valencia, and it's easy to travel everywhere. So yeah, I definitely like Spain, the way of living, the family values for a lot of reasons. I'm very good here, and I'm not going anywhere. Well, locally I will, but I'm not going to another country.
Got it. That's an interesting note on there, and it sounds like you've enjoyed the path, but have settled down in a cool place. But Tristan, it's been an absolute blast. Really appreciate you talking about a lot of your expertise, the blog that you run in the bio, and it's been an absolute blast. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Tristan Pelloux. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.